support remains rock solid, and he joins us now from Chicago. Mr. Galli, as you know, your editorial has gotten a lot of attention, and I want to highlight some of what you said here. You argue that evangelicals like yourself may like the president's platform, but you think he's grossly immoral. You described him as a near perfect example of a human being who is morally lost and confused. He's abused his authority for personal gain, betrayed his constitutional oath. Other members of the evangelical community, including Billy Graham, your founder's grandson or son, have denounced this.
Yeah, that would be Franklin Graham. Yeah.
Yes, Billy Graham founded, as we point out here, your publication, which is why it was so significant to have Franklin Graham rebuke you. Is the call for President Trump's removal growing?
I don't know. I mean, in one sense, my call for his removal was on the order of hyperbole in this regard. The odds of that happening either by election or a Senate are actually probably fairly slim at this point. What I'm really arguing in the piece fundamentally is that the president is unfit for office. Now, that may be a difference without a distinction without a difference. But the point is, and I'm not really speaking politically, making a political judgment about him, because that's not our expertise at Christianity Today. Mm-hmm. I am making a moral judgment that he's morally unfit, or even more precisely, it's his public morality that makes him unfit. Because all of us, anybody in leadership has, none of us are perfect. We're not looking for saints. We do have private sins, ongoing patterns of behavior that reveal themselves in our private life that we're all trying to work on. Mm-hmm. But a president has certain responsibilities as a public figure to display a certain level of public character and public morality. And the point of my argument is not to judge him as a person in the eyes of God. That's not my job. But to judge his public moral character and ask, has he gone so far that the evangelical constituency that we represent, can we in good conscience do the trade-off anymore? He gives us what we need on pro-life, but he's got this bad character. And the fundamental argument I'm making is we crossed a line somewhere in the impeachment hearings, at least in my mind, that balance no longer works. We're dealing with a person who we...
But when I raise these questions often to Republicans who consider themselves people of faith, what they say is God picks imperfect vessels, right? And the transaction here is that he is delivering on those platform issues. Is it solely the abortion policy that keeps the evangelical community cemented in their support? Because our polling shows that you, sir, are an outlier. 79% of white evangelicals say President Trump is doing a good job as president.
Yeah, I think the pro-life issue is just one of many. Religious freedom for Christians, overseas especially, would be another. There have been books written about what's going on with the conservative evangelical support of Trump, so that's not something we can quite get into here. It does go fairly deep. I think what I'm mostly concerned with is the fact that it's like you've mentioned a previous guest, it's the unwillingness of my brothers and sisters in Christ. I have no animus against them, mm-hmm. but it strikes me as strange that for people who take the teachings of Jesus Christ seriously, teachings of the Ten Commandments seriously, that we can't at least say publicly and out loud in front of God and everybody that this man's character is deeply, deeply concerning to us, and in my judgment, has crossed a line, and I no longer think he's fit to lead the United States of America. And I don't say that politically. I mean, our job as Christians is to love our neighbor. Right. We want the United States, everybody, left, right, black, white, of every variety of sexualities. We want them to prosper. And I'm saying that given the moral character, the public moral character of our president, that's not going to happen. It's likely to degenerate very radically over the next... Mm-hmm. It has already degenerated, and it's time for us to put a stake in the ground and say no more.
So you see the next election as sort of a referendum on the moral fiber of this country?
Well, I don't know that I would put it that way. I am saying to my evangelical brothers and sisters, take your interest in politics and put it aside for a moment, and let's start thinking about morality. And do you really think
But if
that
there's
there is
no
a
other
balance to being-
Republican running on these platform issues, if President Trump is the only person that on these issues you have laid out is so key to your community, some Republicans just find it an impossible alternative to vote for a
Yeah, no,
Democrat.
I grant that. I grant that. I'm saying what I think, about the only person I represent is me and maybe my magazine, and not for that much longer since I'm retiring in a few
Yeah.
days. What you do about the fact that he's morally unfit, there are a lot of political options for that, and I don't really have a whole lot to say. Some are going to say work for his conviction at the Senate. Some are going to say overturn him at the election. Others are saying that's all impossible. We would need to figure out a third strategy.
Yeah.
I don't have a strategy. I'm not a political
Right.
person. The questions you were asking people on your show, you guys are amazing how much stuff you know and the nuances. You guys figure that out.
Well, you are, of course, an influential voice within the evangelical community, as is your publication. So we wanted to get you to weigh in. Thank you very much for your time,
Thank
sir.
you for the time. I appreciate it.
Our political panelists are on their way in, so don't go away.
That is, that's pretty serious whenever you have Face the Nation and other major networks that is now tapping in on the evangelical community pertaining to the true orthodox feelings of Donald J. Trump. And there's no doubt, I mean, whenever you elect a president, you're not electing a pastor. You're not electing a minister. You're not electing somebody in the clergyman arena that's supposed to have a certain amount of upstanding morals about them in the true Christian arena. There's no doubt that from a political stance versus a spiritual stance is two different, completely separate entities. But when you have somebody that's standing up in the recourse of being a born-again Christian, such as Donald J. Trump, that walks around with the Christian logo on his platel, and you see some of the things that he's been involved in throughout all his life that is now being brought out to the general public, regardless whether it be shady deals, business deals up in New York, or regardless whether he was cheating on his wives, or doing this or doing that, or declaring bankruptcy 3 or 4 different times, or recently pertaining to the events that has occurred just within the past 6 months. One has to start scratching their head towards saying, okay, we understand that a politician is not a preacher. We understand that a politician don't have to be under the same limelight as far as being scrutinized as a minister, a full-fledged minister. But at the same time, we also realize that there are certain qualifications that goes along with a politician, regardless whether he be a president, a vice president, the attorney general, regardless whether he be a senator, a congressman, regardless whether he be a governor or a lieutenant governor or a state senator, all the way down to your local judges or your local sheriffs. There are certain criterias that the general public here in America looks towards in the arena of the political affairs. And once you break rank with that with that common core of what's to be expected, that's whenever people like this magazine starts questioning, where are we with this guy as far as him becoming and continually being our United States president. Because you got to keep in mind, the president of the United States is not just a president of one particular group of people. He's not just a president to the elite. He's not just the president to the smartest of the smart or the richest of the rich. He's the president to all of us, regardless whether we're rich, poor, educated, non-educated, regardless of what side of the railroad tracks we live on, regardless whether we're black, white, green, or yellow. He is our president of the United States of America. And of course, if you're involved in federal, state, or military affairs, then he becomes more than just your president. Now he's your chief and commander. He becomes your chief and your commander for all branches of military. Not just one branch, but all branches of military. So you got to ask yourself a question from a moral standpoint. How much is too much? What Bill Clinton done, I thought was too much. Just from my opinion. Because it all come out about the sex scandal and about the heterosexual deal pertaining to Monica Lewinsky. And all that done was infiltrate young, weak, immature minds in not only America but throughout the world towards bringing that much more garbage and that much more pollution into society. Towards saying, oh, I did not have sex with that woman. In other words, he not only was substituting his relationship with his wife towards having an affair, he not only lied to the American people that he didn't have sex with that woman, but it was his whole demeanor in what's to be expected out of somebody like that. Because you keep in mind, these people ain't speaking on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter platforms. They got the big mic. And there's people all over the country and all over the planet that are inspired by what they say and what they do, regardless whether it be in a negative form or a positive form. And to me, this is my opinion and it don't cost you a thing, Bill Clinton should have walked away from his position towards being the president of the United States. The same way as Jimmy Swaggart had to bow out of the Assembly of God Association, and they asked him to bow out for a year, for one whole solid year, to remain quiet, stay out of the limelight. We don't want to bring any more embarrassment to the family, but according to the Assembly of God Association, it had brought such of a stain to the whole association all over America and throughout the world that the best thing to have done was to set him down and go through some sort of major recourse pertaining to marriage counseling. That's what Jimmy Swaggart and Jimmy Swaggart's wife needed at that time. That way it didn't bring more shame to the association. To me, when Bill Clinton was not asked to step down, it brought that much more shame to the association, which was the association of the political American people. Regardless of what association that you're associated with, political associations or spiritual associations, there are certain criteria that is expected out of you. And if you go beyond that rule of law, there are certain people that's going to shun you, shame you, degrade you, demoralize you, criticize you, demonize you, and I could go on and on. But when you have a group of people such as the Republican Party, rather than them shaming Mr. Donald Trump for his actions, they're actually trying to uplift him towards him being the chosen one, towards him being elected as him being the righteous one, towards them trying to say that he is of good standards, not only in the eyes of the general public pertaining to the political affairs, but he's in the good standards of the general public in his spiritual affairs. And it does not. The magazine hit it on the head. They got it right to the T. It does not. Donald Trump's moral actions does not line up with true evangelical morals. Period. Period. We understand that we voted in a president and not a preacher. But we also understand that there's certain dynamics that are expected out of somebody in that position. And whenever you no longer practice those, but you're still defining yourself as Jesus Christ Superstar, something's wrong with those two ideologies because they don't mix and match. I think that's what the author of the magazine was trying to say there in regard to all of this. And I support the magazine in what the guy is trying to bring criticism of the chief and commander in. Now, whether or not that makes a difference in other people's eyes or other people's feelings about the president, that's a $64,000 question. Some people probably don't care. They probably don't care if he was to actually shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue in New York City. They would still stand behind him and support him and be rooting for him towards him being the elected president.
We're back with some analysis from our political panel. David Sanger is the national security correspondent and the senior writer for the New York Times. Sungmin Kim covers the White House from Capitol Hill for the Washington Post. Jamel Bowie is a CBS News political analyst and a columnist with the New York Times. And Ramesh Ponnuru is the senior editor at the National Review and a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. Ramesh, I want to start with you to pick up where we left off with the Christianity Today editorial. And this quandary that's laid out of judging the President of the United States as someone who should be a moral leader. Something was talked about quite a lot during the Clinton impeachment as a failing of that president. Why aren't Republicans openly talking about this? I mean, this editorial that was written caused a firestorm. I mean, it really got a lot of attention. Why is this new that it's being talked about by Republicans?
Well, in some ways, we've been talking about nothing but the president's character for 3 years now, and not just evangelicals, not just conservatives, but all of us. In a way, is the central issue in American politics.
Not many op-eds calling for his removal from office.
But that's right. So we now have, of course, this impeachment controversy, which has raised the stakes on the entire argument. And there's been a huge evolution in these views. Evangelicals, as late as 2011 in polling, white evangelical Christians were saying the president's character is important. The president without sound character can't be a good president. That has completely changed over time, and we're now in a situation where the parties are so polarized around this particular person. People are switching parties on the basis of whether they support this person, not on the basis of any particular view, right? We've seen that in the Congress. We've seen that with Justin Amash. We've seen that with Jeff Van Drew. Amash leaving the Republican Party, Van Drew coming to the Republican Party, just solely on the basis of what they think about President Trump. That is the number one polarizing issue now.
Well, Jamel, Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend and 2020 candidate, talked about this a little bit, and he has incorporated more sort of discussion of morality and religion in his own campaign rhetoric. Are Democrats seeing an opportunity here? Because even Mark Galley said, I don't know what to tell people to do politically in terms of, this moral quandary.
Vice President or former Vice President Joe Biden has made this kind of the central point of his campaign, that he is running to restore dignity to the White House, right? To restore a sense of normalcy, and also to get someone out who he views as immoral. And I think some Democrats, especially the more moderate candidates who are not trying to outbid each other with policy proposals, are probably going to take this line more and more. I want to make one comment about sort of the relationship between Trump and white evangelicals. I think one thing that's important to note in this conversation is not just to see change in opinion about how white evangelicals view political leadership, but, and this is detailed in the great book called The End of White Christian America by the Public Religion Research Institute's Robert Jones, that over the past 5 years, white evangelicals have come to see their position in society in battle, right? They have come to see themselves as being on the losing end of a culture war, on the losing end of a political change, of demographic change. And so in that context, President Trump may be vulgar and immoral, but he appears to be at least a defender of their perceived religious and ethnic interests. If you're going to think of white evangelicalism as being sort of like, not an ethnicity, but sort of like a national group, a kind of distinct demographic group within the country.
Sungmin, New York Times had a very long read on fear and loyalty in the Republican Party. And it was acknowledging that there are these sort of private conversations that I'm sure you've been part of, as have I, of dissatisfaction, but fear of speaking out. And it plays off the same idea.
It does, because you've seen what happens to the Republican officials when they do speak out. Jeff Flake, the former Arizona senator, Bob Corker, the former Tennessee senator. There is a reason why they are former United States senators, particularly for Jeff Flake, when he was one of the most vocal critics of President Trump and his conduct and his policies. His polling numbers just cratered, and he knew he could not run for re-election again as a Republican without that base of support in his party. What's going on now, the president has such a block on his party. And you talked at, I believe Patrick McHenry was also quoted in that article as saying he has this loyalty among the voters, which is why you've seen also Republican lawmakers take different political stances too on policy issues that they may not have had at other times. You've seen the Republican Party evolve on the issue of trade under Trump and Trumpism, if you will, on foreign policy. And I think a big question that we will be examining for years to come is whether Trumpism is kind of a blip on the radar of the history of the Republican Party, or if it's really fundamentally changing.
David, one of the things that's unique to Trumpism is his approach on foreign policy, in that he's been fine with breaking some China because it's necessary on this impossible challenge with North Korea. He'd take a meeting with Kim Jong-un, and virtually no other president would consider doing it, certainly none in the past. He's now at this point where his centerpiece foreign policy issue is going to be tested in the coming days. What do you know about what North Korea is planning?
Well, we don't know a whole lot about what they're planning, but we know a lot about what they've made, and we know a lot about what it is that they're saying. What they've made is probably 8 to 10 new nuclear weapons, or at least the fuel for those nuclear weapons, in the 18 months since the president had this signature trip. And by the way, the signature trip, as you and I discussed before, was a pretty brilliant idea to have the summit between these two leaders. That had never happened before since the end of the Korean War. The problem is the president didn't prepare, and he didn't really have a plan for what he would do if Kim basically used this to play for time. And that's exactly
what has happened. And now we know that U.S. officials, and they tell me, I know they tell you, they're taking this threat of ending the diplomacy seriously. They're hoping Kim Jong-un's year-end deadline isn't real.
You know, what's surprising to me is that there really isn't a plan B. I was talking to White House officials, intelligence officials for a big piece we have in the Times today, and previous presidents, George Bush, certainly President Obama, had considered plans to take out a ICBM on the pad. President Obama executed a cyber operation against North Korea's missiles before they launched. It was only partially successful at best. But I don't see a whole lot of interest in the Trump administration in doing anything other than waiting for this to happen and then going to the United Nations. Well, that's back to the same approach that the president used to complain was the failed policy of Obama, Bush, and others.
And Sugman, one of the things we talked about, Senator Van Hollen, is the idea that Congress is trying to give a few more tools here. There are a lot of things tucked into that NDAA the president just signed. What else do we need to know of? Because the perception in a lot of the country is that nothing happened in the U.S. Congress other than impeachment. But the president just signed a whole lot of things in the past 24 hours.
You did. If you set aside impeachment, which is very difficult to do, the president on the policy front actually had a pretty good couple of weeks. He got his long-desired Space Force, the sixth branch of the military. He accomplished a major initiative that went a lot against Republican orthodoxy, which is the paid federal or paid family leave or parental leave for federal workers. He has a massive trade deal that had the support of Democrats and got the support of the AFL-CIO on board, and it will get ratified by large margins in the Congress. But I think with all the political oxygen going towards impeachment, it is difficult for the president and his advisors to talk about his accomplishments. And you do see the president at campaign rallies and at other events try to talk up what he's done for the economy, what he's done policy front. But it all goes back to this question of impeachment. He is focused on it. He is obsessed with it. He is clamoring for that Senate trial so he could, in his view, perhaps exonerate himself. And that's going to be such a focus, and it's going to be hard for the other policy messages to break out in the next couple of weeks.
We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll take a break. Be back more with our panel.
This is on Face the Nation pertaining to their opinions and everything. I want to weigh in one more time before I close this particular video out. Donald Trump has had some really good accomplishments on some areas that needed to be touched off on that no other president was willing to tackle. One of those was drug control here in America, pertaining to the drug cost and the opioid crisis pertaining to all the overdoses and abuses of drugs and alcohol. Donald Trump has helped the military pertaining to our veterans. Donald Trump has helped to reach out to liberate offenders in prisons towards letting them have earlier releases to give them more of a chance. Donald Trump has helped whenever it comes to people experimenting with drugs in regard towards giving them a possibility that these drugs may actually help or preserve people's lives. Donald Trump has helped whenever it comes to the problems pertaining to the illegal immigrants and the sanctuary cities that is doing what they're doing. He's helped as far as noticing and identifying the unstableness of the NAFTA free trade agreements towards us basically giving the farm away. There is so many things that Donald Trump has done in his presidency that is undeniable, as well as the economy, stimulating the economy up and ratcheting it up to where it is right now, especially with the 401ks and what's going on with the Wall Street of people's 401ks and stuff. There are so many things that he has done that has been extraordinary. You know, I'm going to call it like I see it. regardless whether other people on other parts of the aisle want to call it or not. I'm going to call it like I see it. But I also see what others is seeing in favoritism to one of our rivals, which is the Russians, in their communist-controlled atmosphere that they're still living in over there, even though the Berlin Wall has fallen for the past 30 years. And for some reason, Donald Trump has found more favor in those regards than he has our partners pertaining to the Ukrainians towards them being our allies. Why he has done this, I don't know. But it's as obvious as the nose on somebody's face whenever you stop that type of aid going to an ally that is in a controversial war with, once more, one of our rivals, one of our enemies, the Russians. Whenever you stop aid, and then it's only until after you have been busted, realized that you have been caught, that was whenever he released the aid. It's as obvious as the nose on your face that this has occurred. Now the $64,000 question still remains. Why did it occur? Why did Donald Trump do what he done? What was his primary, fundamental, hidden agenda in doing that? Was it to benefit we the people pertaining to the Ukrainians having some hiccups pertaining to their corruption over in their government? Or was it primarily to attack his opponent, which was the Bidens? And Donald Trump felt like that probably was going to be the only way that he could pull off his election, was by bringing up dirt on his opponent that's running against him in the 2020 election. Is that the reason why Donald Trump done what he done? That's the $64,000 question. Once more, that's on one side of the aisle pertaining to the Ukrainians and what his fundamental intentions was, or his hidden agendas was. The moral side of it is on the opposite side of the aisle, pertaining to his behavior, pertaining to him basically lying about giving out untruths and becoming a poor example for other national leaders to believe in or to accept as it being the gospel. I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why the Democrat Party rose up against Donald Trump, was because of national interest in diminishing our republic, diminishing our unity in our republic. Because once it reaches the status that people are mocking you and making fun of you, like they done in the French, I forgot now what the name of it was now, but they was mocking him and making fun of him. Once it reaches that elevation of disrespect, once more, proof's in the pudding. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out, hey, these people are giving out signals of other nationalities in regard to an embarrassing president that is not being taken serious by all these other national leaders. Kind of like Kim Jong-un, North Korea. God only knows what he's got up his sleeve. I've said all along that he wasn't to be trusted. Thanks again to my viewers. Shalom.